introduce and then start. I'll start. Good evening. My name is Linda Gorski, and I'm the president of the Houston Archaeological Society. And I'd like to welcome you to our meeting tonight. Our program is going to be a history of the Forts Velasco at the original mouth of the Brazos River. And our speaker is going to be Chris Kneupper. Did I say that right? Close enough? Okay, good. Chris is a retired engineer and avocational archaeologist, having lived in Brazoria County for over 40 years. He's a charter member of the Brazos Port Archaeological Society and a long-term member of the Texas Archaeological Society, having participated in many excavations in the county and around the state. He is also a member of the Sons of the Republic of Texas and a Texas Master Naturalist, and sits on the board of the Cradle of Texas Conservancy. This latter entity is a local land trust that has a long-term goal of financing and managing the building of a replica of the fort, the 1832 fort near the former site. Chris, this is what he's going to talk about tonight. Whoops.
Again, guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. My name is Eduard Harkort. Excuse me, we're in Houston, right? So my name is Eduard Harkort. I am captain of engineers of the Texas Revolutionary Army. And my friend Chris Kneupper can't make it tonight. So he's asked me to come back from the dead and tell you this tale of old Velasco. It's going to be about half history and half archaeology, emphasizing a recent geophysical survey we've completed down there that has great import for the fort you see in this picture. This is a former diorama that was created and was used at the Brazoria County Historical Museum for many years, no longer in existence though. And personally, I think it's one of the best representations of the original 1832 Fort Velasco that sat at the old mouth of the Brazos River. My membership in those several groups has overlapping interests and has caused us to do a deep dive into the research for the several forts that existed at the mouth of the Brazos. That board? Okay. There are two main reasons. The group that I belong to, called the Cradle of Texas Conservancy, for many decades has had a goal of building a replica of this fort. And only recently have we gotten to a point where we think we can pull that off. And it was past time to do a deep dive into the research. And then very quickly, as we got into the research, we found information that taught us that we may have been looking in the wrong spot. You see, the original site has been lost to history. And it motivated us to do a geophysical survey with this new information. So these are the reasons that I did this research, and I hope to share it with you tonight. As you can perhaps tell, I ham it up a little bit. I dramatize some things for you this evening. Again, this is sort of a chronological and archaeological history of old Velasco. We have a more extensive report that we posted on the internet. And then, as y'all well know, this group well knows, historical archaeology is often preceded by archival research. And in this case, this was very important. It's almost like a case study in how important that can be. And I also hope to show you tonight that old Velasco played a really important role in the early history of this part of Texas. So again, I will show you some of that tonight. It looks like they're just rolling through the slides instead of moving from slide to slide. So please put up with me. This is a modern map of the area. down south of Houston, 50 miles down 288. Perhaps you can see some of the yellow highways coming into view in the upper left through towns such as Clute, Lake Jackson, Richwood, eventually down into Freeport. This area has grown together and is informally known as Brazosport. Old Velasco is there at the mouth of the old Brazos River on the left bank, right here. Across the old mouth is Quintana. You might notice that the river, though, was diverted here in 1929 to a new diversion channel, and locals call that the New River. And they refer to this 4-mile leg here as the Old River, and that now constitutes the channel for Freeport Harbor. But old Velasco sat right here where Surfside Beach is today. Quintana is still called Quintana, but that'll orient you a little bit for where we're talking about this evening. Let's begin our story here. This is a fella that was a very talented Mexican general officer. He was head of the artillery school in Mexico City, and he was given a plum assignment to come to Texas over the calendar year of 1828, leading a boundary expedition. He brought along scientists and naturalists, and his public mission was to investigate the East Texas border area. Perhaps you can see that in that little map, where the border had been established by treaty with Spain in 1819. And we still have that border today. But he also had a private mission. You see, Stephen F. Austin was, informing his colony, was very successful. And some of the Mexican politicians became suspicious and were skeptical of the assimilation of these new immigrants into the language and customs and laws of Mexico. So his private mission was to see what was going on. Now, you'll pardon me just a second. I wish to check and see if I maybe missed a slide, but no. Yeah, there is a slide missing. I'm sorry, folks. But when he returned to Mexico, he posted an influential report. He became alarmed at what he had found, and it led the politicians of Mexico to pass this law of April 6, 1830. Among the many provisions of that law was that it forbade further immigration from the United States. But it also had provisions to military occupy Texas. And this was the birth of the reason that a fort came to exist, at the Brazos. Terran's plan was to build 6 new forts. On this diagram here, I have the existing garrisons shown with a green disc. So at San Antonio de Bexar, at La Bahia or Goliad, and even a few years before 1830 at Nacogdoches, garrisons had been placed. But Terran wanted 6 new forts. The first that he did, within almost days of passing of that law, was to give orders to form Fort Tenochtitlan. You see it there high up on the Brazos. Within a month, he gave orders to form Barranco, Colorado, low on the La Vaca River. Right here. Both were just outside the bounds of the colony. Later that year, they formed Fort Anahuac here at the northwest corner of Galveston Bay. The following year, they built Fort Lipantitlan, low on the Nueces River, and Fort Terran at an important river crossing south of Nacogdoches called the South Pass. And then last, in 1832, did they construct Fort Velasco at the mouth of the Brazos, the only fort on the coast, the only one on land that that was formerly part of Austin's colony. It was built by a fellow named Domingo de Ugartechea, and he came from Matamoros with about 100 soldiers and 17 artillerymen to the place. He built a circular palisade fort, some later drawings of which you see below, even another diorama on the far right over there. It was two concentric circles of vertical posts or stakes, 6 feet apart, and filled halfway in between with dirt and sand to create an elevated walking surface for the sentries. In the center was a large sand mound, taller than the walls, and on which sat a large cannon that could rotate on a pivot 360 degrees. What happened was, over at Anahuac, the commander there named Bradburn got in trouble with the local colonists. He threw some of them in jail. One of them was even called William Barrett Travis. And this alienated the colonists that lived around there and even near Brazoria. The alcalde at Brazoria, John Austin, even went over to Anahuac to try to discuss with Bradburn the release of these prisoners. But when he reneged on an agreement, John Austin became infuriated, returned to Brazoria to get militia and cannon to go reduce Fort Velasco and release the prisoners. But he had to pass this new fort at the mouth of the Brazos. He asked Ugartechea if he could pass. Ugartechea said, no, my orders are to support Bradburn. So John Austin realized he would have to reduce Fort Velasco first, and this led to the Battle of Velasco in the 26th of June. Now, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is something wrong with this file. I'm missing about every other slide. Could we try to open up the PowerPoint? It's really breaking up my presentation. Can we? Okay, here they are.
Okay, that's what you would like instead, right?
I'm sorry, folks. Can we go to, let's go to slideshow. Here, let's just click on that right
Okay.
there.
Is that better?
Same thing. Okay, let me just go ahead. This is a slide that shows some of the order of battle of the Battle of Velasco. The plan was for John Austin and his militia to come down the river in a schooner called the Brazoria on a moonlit night, engage the fort with cannon fire. The Mexican troops were expected to retreat into the fort. And then in the darkness, land forces were to circle the fort and dig trenches. North of the fort, John Austin was to dig trenches and erect parapets in the darkness. Other forces were to go to the driftwood along the beach and occupy that, attacking at dawn. Things did not go according to plan. Things did not go according to plan. In the darkness, one of the soldiers disobeyed orders, primed his musket, and it went off, alerting the Mexican soldiers to the presence of troops around the fort, and they started firing. One of them wrote later that the fort erupted like a volcano. The Brazoria was engaged by the large 8 or 9 pound naval cannon on that central bastion and was damaged and ran aground. The next morning, it was a stalemate. But soon the Mexicans ran out of ammunition and had to surrender. They were to be carried back to Mexico on the Brazoria or another ship, but none was available. So they had to march overland. They eventually went back to San Felipe de Austin and then back through Victoria to La Bahia and then Matamoros. You know. This is a drawing that was done by Eduard Harkort. It was found in his journal that was published only in 1999. And he was a German engineer that had gone to Mexico to work in the mines of a British company and had gotten involved in politics, thrown in prison twice, got departed from Mexico to New Orleans, where he met in late 1835 a fellow named Stephen F. Austin, recruiting for the Texas cause. He came to Texas aboard a ship bound for Velasco, arrived in February of 1836, and presumably drew this drawing. Look here what this engineer did. He drew a scale drawing of old Velasco, including a circular fort with a central bastion. We have never known the size of the fort until this document comes out. It measures just less than 100 feet in diameter. So if we are to build a replica, we now sort of know about the size that we should build. And we didn't know that before that point. Let's talk about the location of the 1832 fort. This is on the left is a plat map of Old Velasco that was created in 1837. It shows at the end of the long arrow, a public square called Monument Square at the approximate location where this fort was described. A blow up of that area is shown there on the right. Here is Monument Square. This street here is known as Fort Street. So what might be at the bottom of Fort Street? Other information that we have suggests that the fort may lie across Fort Street from Monument Square in the green or pink highlighted areas. But you see, back in 1980, Ann Fox and others did a cultural resource survey here at the mouth of the Brazos. And they, as I'll show in a minute, identified where the old Monument Square might lie. And they hypothesized that, well, what else could be commemorated in 1837 in Velasco, except maybe this fort? So they hypothesized the fort sat here. Okay, but as I'd like to show you this evening, we now believe otherwise, and I'll show you some evidence for that. The green tinted area is an area where a building known as the Archer House was built in 1838. And the pink area are two lots in block 13. That's Block 13, two of those lots were purchased later by the Shannon family, and that'll have a place in our story in just a minute. I also want to point out Block 61 here. This is where a Republic of Texas battery was built during the Texas Revolution, indeed, probably by Eduard Harkort, fellow that's standing before you right now. But two obscure documents came to light recently. This is some words from a deed in 1845. It's when they sold the Archer House property. And it says, all that certain parcel of property lying and situated in the town of Velasco, known as the Archer House, with the 4 lots immediately adjoining said Archer House, but not including the 2 lots near what was called the Old Fort. Now, the Republic of Texas battery was in block 61, as I've shown you. So this can only refer to the 1832 Mexican fort. And again, lots 8 and 9 in block 13 were bought by the Shannon family. In 1898, a history-minded lady from Houston named Adele Looscan interviewed elderly residents of Velasco and published one of the first articles in the Southwestern Historical Journal. And one was the widow Shannon. And she claimed that her house there in block 13 was the location of the Mexican fort. And Alexander Glass Follett, another elderly resident, agreed with her. Both of these individuals were children in the years immediately following the Texas Revolution and would have seen remnants of the fort when they were younger. So I attach substantial authority to these documents. Now, as I hope to show you here, this is an overlooked fact as well, that the dead in the battle, approximately a dozen on each side, were buried near the fort. But this has long been forgotten. Ugarte Chea, in his after report, reports that he buried his dead nearby. And in just the last few years, an article has come to light from, of all things, an Arkansas newspaper that published proceedings of the Ayuntamiento at San Felipe de Austin in late 1832 that speak about a monument to be erected at the mouth of the Brazos River to those who nobly fought and fell on the plains of Velasco. And then it gives great details about that monument. So what might be in Monument Square instead of the fort? All of a sudden, a light bulb went on in our heads. Monument Square is not the location of the fort, it's the location of the Texian graves. Mary Austin Holly, in one of her many visits there, wrote in 1838 that she was given a tour of the area and shown, pointed to the graves of those who fell in the first battle for independence. Looked at the old fort, the work of the Mexicans. Velasco looks quite like a place. So we have two competing hypotheses. What is in Monument Square? Is it the fort or is it a cemetery of the Texian graves? And this is what motivated the Geophysical Survey that I'll talk to you about at the end. But before we do, let's continue with our history part. After the Battle of Velasco, the Mexican troops left Velasco. The disturbances at Anahuac caused those soldiers to leave. And even at Nacogdoches, disturbances there caused them to leave, all in mid-1832. And they more or less abandoned Texas militarily for 3 years. And this is sort of a undertold story of how the Texas Revolution happened. But they all went back to Mexico. Mexico was in rebellion, and the officers wanted to perhaps get in the fight. So there was sort of a push-pull thing going on, and they went back to Mexico and abandoned Texas for about 3 years. But as Santa Anna gained power in Mexico, put down some revolutions in other parts of Mexico, he decided to return to his rebellious northern state called Texas. And one of the things that he did was send some blockading ships. One of them was the Correo Mexicano, who placed itself at anchor off Velasco. One of the commercial schooners of Thomas McKinney and Samuel May Williams, known as the San Felipe, was returning from New Orleans that day, 1st of September, 1835. It had been armed with 2 6-pound waist guns. Its deck had been armored with bales of cotton, and the crew was provided with small arms, as they expected some trouble, and they sailed right into it. On board was the returning Stephen F. Austin. After 2 years in Mexico, 18 months in prison, he had returned through New Orleans to Texas. San Felipe had the wind position, made port. Stephen F. Austin and some of the other passengers ashore. But then Thomas McKinney sent the San Felipe and his steamer, the Loura, after the Correo, and they had an evening sea chase and battle, and overnight sea chase where they captured the Correo and sent it to New Orleans to be charged with piracy. Stephen F. Austin watched this battle from the beach. Stephen F. Austin, the affable diplomatic man whose policy was fidelity to Mexico, stood on the beach that evening at Velasco and changed his mind for rebellion right there. This is the opening shot of the Texas Revolution. Not that place they call Gonzales. That happened a month after this. Stephen F. Austin went forward, traveling up the valley of the Brazos, speaking for rebellion. Carefully, his words were not for independence of Texas from Mexico, but rebellion against Santa Anna and in favor of the Constitution of 1824. But I'm going to dramatize this evening and play, this is the opening shot of the Texas Revolution. You know, of course, about the First Republic of Texas Navy. It was authorized 5 months before the Declaration of Independence. Thomas McKinney and Samuel May Williams had a big hand in financing and buying used schooners and arming them in New Orleans. And this fleet then appeared off the Texas coast. Its main port was out of the mouth of the Brazos. At that time, there was no port of Galveston. There was no port of Houston. Those did not exist yet. These operated the first Texas Navy mostly out of the mouth of the Brazos. This drawing was found in the Nacogdoches archives. It's a polygon-shaped fort. Words are in English. These archives go through 1836. I don't think this can be anything other than that Republic of Texas battery. And if you're counting, this is Fort Velasco number 2. The little title piece there calls it Fort Velasco. After the major events of the Texas Revolution, especially after San Jacinto, the government, the provisional government of the new Republic of Texas met at Velasco. After all, many other places had been burned down. This is an old picture of the Brown-Hoskins Tavern. And it's thought that that was one of the few accommodations for the government. And they met there from May through October 1836. Santa Anna was kept a prisoner in a house behind this structure and treated with the government, probably on the porch right there. And he signed the public and private treaties of Velasco at this place here. So again, in dramatizing it, the Texas Revolution ended at Old Velasco too. So it started and ended there. This is a map published in 1858 that shows how Velasco has grown. It actually has data from 1852, and I've marked a few of the landmarks we've talked about. You can see the open area of Monument Square. You can see that the Archer House has actually become a complex of buildings, and the Shannon House is also marked. Velasco did grow and prosper up to and through the Civil War. But after the Civil War, it began a long decline. Ships were bigger. The sandbar at the mouth of the Brazos was a hazard, and the ports of Galveston and Houston grew up to become the major regional ports. This is a picture that shows the first Civil War fort. You can perhaps see the area of Monument Square marked with a teepee-like tent and a flag, perhaps showing an encampment of Civil War troops that manned the fort about the place where the Republic of Texas battery was. This was reportedly manned with 2 18-pound cannon in the early part of the Civil War, known as the town redoubt or the town fort. But as the famous Anaconda Plan took hold along the Mississippi, the Brazos became an important outlet for blockade runners running cotton. And additional forts were built to protect the mouth of the Brazos. This drawing shows an entire complex of forts. The letter B marks the location of Velasco. A was a fort at Quintana. You have bridges and roads. You have a redan over protecting Oyster Creek marked with an E. And there was a mud fort at D. So a whole complex of forts existed at the mouth of the Brazos. This is a drawing that shows some of those completed forts by the man that built them. He completed them in January of 1864. And the one at Velasco, he marks as Fort Sulikowski. This is an engineer drawing we found in the Gilmer Civil War collection at the University of North Carolina that shows some details about this second Civil War fort, or Fort Velasco number 4. And this painting here is a painting of a fort from South Carolina that is in similar construction. By this time, they did not build brick or log forts. They used stacked earth embankment forts that look like this. This is a drawing from a Yankee newspaper that shows these two forts. And it shows the one on the Velasco side is just toward the river from a storehouse portico, which we believe was the 2-story Archer house. So this gives us the approximate position of this Civil War fort, this second or bigger one. And this is a map series made in 1890 that shows the appearance of the mouth of the Brazos River over the years from about 1858 through 1890. And it shows how the beach is accreting quite a bit. And the very last images show construction of jetties there in 1889 and 1890. So today we find that the beach exists about a quarter mile toward the ocean from where it was in the 1830s. So I'm now going to segue to modern archaeological efforts and some of the things that have gone on there. In the 1970s, there was great interest in a local group called the Fort Velasco Restoration Association that wanted to build a replica. And they drew this drawing of some of their excavations. They found a cistern, they found a brick fireplace, they found a brick foundation. And then they designed a 300-foot diameter fort to incorporate those elements in a replica. But they never found the funds or the land, to follow through on this plan. But this drawing here is very important because it's the only thing in print that shows their trenches and some of the excavations and things they found at this time. By 1980, the Corps of Engineers decided that they wanted to widen the harbor by 200 yards, move the North Jetty 200 yards further over, and then dredge away 200 yards of land on the Velasco side. So they hired UTSA, the Center for Archaeological Research, and they did a cultural resource survey, and this is one drawing from their report. They did an excellent job of figuring out the old blocks in that 1837 plat, which are shown as square blocks here, and then the modern streets of Surfside. You can see many of those now exist on this new land toward the beach. And then they plotted in the little black dots are the structures from that 1852, 1858 map. Notice that the modern streets of Surfside do not lay on top of the old Velasco streets, but with one exception. The old Fort Street stayed in existence because of the Coast Guard station that was down at Velasco. As the town of Velasco went away, only the Coast Guard station remained. And that road stayed in service, so you can perhaps see there that 4th Street is overlain by a modern street that today goes by the name Monument Avenue. That's a very important reference because it's the only match that we have from the old days to the new. And this report also hypothesized that the Mexican fort would be in Monument Square. You see it there with a dashed circle. And from that time, we have always believed that. You see the excavations that were done in the 1970s turned up artifacts that were mostly Anglo-American and residential in nature. They were not Mexican and they were not military. So people like the Brazos Archaeological Society tended not to believe the fort was where the Fort Velasco Restoration Association said it was, but it was here. And that was believed from 1980 until just a couple of years ago. This is another drawing from their report. It shows exactly where they did some excavations. And it also reports the cistern, the chimney base, and that brick foundation again. The project to widen the harbor did not actually begin until about 1990. And one of the first activities was to dig a 40-foot wide trench where the new jetty line would go, so that as they disassembled the old jetty, they could use those granite boulders to fill that trench. And during that time, as that trench was dug just to the land side of the Coast Guard station, a whole bunch of remnants were found in that trench by the track hoe operator. Unfortunately, we did not learn of this at the time. One of them was they found 25 to 30 12-pound cannonballs. They found live oak tree trunks forming some kind of platform and other wooden walkways, but they found them very deep. You can see 10 feet deep, 12 to 15 feet deep is where they found these things. And only later did one of our members, James Smith, who's very good at this, talk to the track hoe operator, interviewed him, and wrote down his recollections, placing this in the 41 BO 125 file. We believe that these are remnants of that large Civil War fort. As the dredge actually began its work in 1992, cutting away gradually, the bank, it formed what we call a cut bank, sort of a little bluff or hill that was washed by the waters of the harbor channel. The Coast Guard station was removed. BAS found a trash pit there full of residential artifacts. And we called in, the Corps of Engineers and the THC. I think a Mr. James Brusette came to see us. And one of our members, Johnny Poland, was walking him down that cut bank. He reaches over the cut bank, he pulls out something and he hands it to Mr. Brusette. This is a Brown Bess musket, a bayonet. So Mr. Brusette turned to the Corps of Engineer rep and said, "Do you have a contractor who could excavate this real quick?" So the dredge stopped its work for some months. They hired Pruitt and Associates, who did an excavation in Block 11. Cut bank you see is right here. This is the jetty line. The open area there is Monument Square. And they found a whole bunch of post holes for the buildings that existed there. This is the block that had the Brown-Hoskins Hotel, where the government of the Republic of Texas met. The little skinny building up there, that was the Francis J. Haskins house. That's where Santa Anna was kept a prisoner. Believing that the fort was then in the former Monument Square, it's in a block that in the modern Surfside plat is called Block 569. We partnered with the city of Surfside, who owned that block, to do a geophysical survey in the year 2015 by Moore Archeological, thinking the fort was there. And this is a representation from their report. The shaded in area is the area that was surveyed, and the blue and red areas are anomalies that they reported. They called them low and medium priority anomalies. We were somewhat disappointed not to see a circle. We thought we might find two concentric circles of post holes or something like that. But we did not see that. And for some years afterwards, we began to scratch our heads until we found this Arkansas newspaper article that said a monument was supposed to be built in this area, and the fort might be across the street. So we got ourselves together again and funded a second geophysical survey, and that forms the next few slides of my presentation. This is a satellite image of the area. The area that you see with a yellow triangle is what borders the block known as 569. And we called it Area B, that might be the subject of a new geophysical survey. Area A is a Surfside block 568 and happens to be the block owned by the Cradle of Texas Conservancy that had been passed to this local land trust by the Fort Velasco Restoration Association. So we considered these two areas for a new geophysical survey in late 2019. Ultimately, we did a lot of the red bordered area and some of the yellow bounded area that sits under Monument Avenue. You see that street that protrudes in from the upper right? That is Monument Avenue. And we were able to get permission to do that right of way as well. The field work was done in June 2020 by a company called Cultural Resource Analysts out of Freeport, Louisiana, and their report was published last August. The principal investigator was Mr. Jeremy Pye. Thankfully, a small grant was provided to us by the Texas Historical Foundation to help defray the costs. We began by carefully grooming the site. There was a lot of rubble and debris, in this area, and we cleared that away and then mowed it and groomed it several times to make it, as flat as possible for the survey, and established a new 20 meter by 20 meter grid system. You can see some of the lines there. Electrical resistivity, ground penetrating radar, and magnetic radiometry, and you see the instruments used there. In the background of that image on the left, you can see a fence-like structure in the background. That is the area of Block 569, and in the intervening years, the village of Surfside Beach had built a circular structure to simulate the fort based on that 1980-81 report. You can see a little white tent there. That was our headquarters for the survey. And then the structure over there is the Surfside City Hall structure, the former boathouse of the Coast Guard station. These are some of the results from that survey. Let me orient you. We did establish a grid north that used the axis of the Brazos River as north. It's truly almost perfectly magnetic northwest, but we called it grid north. So if you look at these images, the harbor channel is on the left side of these images. The Parkview Road or 14th Street is on the right. Monument Avenue is across the top. And what right away it's at the bottom called Treaty Avenue. This is the overall magnetometer reading and the overall conductivity. You can see that in the conductivity, there's a strange sort of curve there. We believe that that's some sort of geological remnant, the old ridge that was present in the 1830s, and the land toward the bottom of this image is what has accreted since the 1830s. This is one of the GPR images. They did it in slices. They made 15 slices depending upon how deep it was. This happens to be slice 11 from a depth of 2.77 meters to 3.07 meters. And I couldn't see much in this, but they point out that there's a circular anomaly right in here. I see a faint circle here, and there's some kind of square or rectangular anomaly there in this slice. Going down to slice 14, we continue to see that square anomaly, although the circular anomaly is less obvious. And we're going down here to a depth of almost 4 meters. Now, returning to our magnetometer and conductivity diagrams as a basis, their analysis apparently included drawing what they saw in the way of anomalies on top of those. And you can see that they saw a series of circular anomalies, what looks like right on the lip of that ridge. In this drawing here, you can see the existing brick foundation, brick fireplace, and the cistern are drawn in for emphasis. And CRA did their analysis. Again, grid north is upwards in this drawing here. This is another overlay from their report. They came to believe that that square anomaly on the side of our survey area, which you see here outlined in red, they believe that might be the rear bastion of that 1863, 1864 Civil War fort. Fort Sulakowski, the gun positions were in a location that is now in the open water of the harbor channel. This is the trench that was dug and filled in with granite boulders. You can see some of them there in the overlay. The black rectangle is the area that Traco operator found those wooden planks and other things and cannonballs in about 1990. And we also note that in the immediate aftermath of that, the Corps of Engineers apparently came in and did some trenching in that area, shown with yellow trenches. We have tried, but not been able to locate any written report on any results they had. And then in about 2008, as land in this area was still existing and hadn't eroded yet, the Corps hired a company out of Austin called PBS&J, and they did some additional trenching in this area, but 2 of their trenches were in this area of the Civil War fort. Neither of those apparently reported finding anything. Our understanding is that those trenches may have been about 2 meters deep max. And then this is sort of the final interpretation in the CRA report. The red boundary shows the exact area that did get actually surveyed. You can see the circular representation for a fort that Surfside built in the former Monument Square. This is Monument Avenue. This is 14th Street, and you can see the jetty line at the top. So they reported that they believe they found evidence of the exact location of the 1832 Fort Velasco with these circular anomalies, and perhaps a piece of the Second Civil War fort. So I've just thrown these two slides in here. So why did it take 5 decades to find these works? And I think I have a piece of the answer. These are this is an aerial photograph from 1930. It's the earliest aerial photograph that I can locate for the area at the mouth of the river. You can see the river winding through here and the beginnings of an early intracoastal canal system. Look along those canals. Look at all the spoil mounds along those. In the old Velasco area, just toward the sea, there's a very big one. So I think in the days before environmental impact statements, they just threw the dredge spoil up on the bank. This is zooming in a little bit to that old Velasco area. You see structures here associated with the Coast Guard station, and I highlighted the area where we believe the 1832 fort is. See that big skull mound right there? That's right on top of the area of the Civil War fort and the Republic of Texas battery. So we were just scratching the surface. The traco operator located those things 3 and 4 meters deep. They were covered by old spoil. Republic of Texas battery. So these cultural resource surveys that we had, it did not look that deep. So we never found evidence of these. And then they went ahead and widened the harbor, and 200 yards of this bank were removed, and probably all evidence of these forts. But they just missed the 1832 Mexican. So to try to bring it to a close, we want to make clear that there was not one Fort Velasco, there were probably at least 4. The first one was built in 1832 by Mexican soldiers. The Harkort drawing suggests it was about 100 feet in diameter. And this is corroborated by the anomalies we see in our 2020 Geophysical Survey. San Felipe is an undertold but important cause of the Texas Revolution, and that a second fort was built during the Texas Revolution in 1836. This fort and the Texas Navy protected the site, so the government felt free to meet there before they held their first election, and some guy named Sam Houston got elected the first president and moved the capital over to West Columbia. So I say, the Texas Revolution started and ended at Old Velasco. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And then, of course, the 3rd and 4th forts were built there during the Civil War. So it's important to understand where each of these were at slightly different locations, because as you try to do archaeology work, these are all laying on top of each other and mixed in there. And of course, we believe that the recent survey has finally given us the precise location of the 1832 fort. And it deserves more attention and better historical interpretation, which we are attempting to do with a replica, not on top of the old site, but a little bit near the ocean at a site that has been agreed to, and we're currently in engineering with that replica. We have built a website to try to illustrate some of these facts, but also give the public access to some of these primary documents that we focused in doing our research, so they can see why we've come to the conclusions we have. I've made a stab at translating some of these old Spanish documents, but I'm not perfect, and we can always use some more help improving them. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Might there be any questions?
No, you were fine. No, but it's 8:30 and you need to be out of here by about 8:45. And I know there's lots of food over here. So please take some food. I think Larry brought some takeout containers. And once again, I want to thank everybody so much for showing up and all the nice gifts. And I'll miss you, but I've got a great house on Hilton Head with 3 guest bedrooms. So come on down. I love you all. Thank you so much. So much.
You bet.
That was great. Huh? We do have some questions. Okay, here. We will.
Chris, we've got some questions for you.